Hello, y'all, and welcome to WriteHive today, where we are talking about humor and talking about how to put humor into your writing. Now, there are a lot of pitfalls to go through, and we're going to look at some ways and some strategies to make humor effective in your stories, as well as just kind of talk about authors that we like, as well as what lessons you can learn from other media and from writers about humor. Let's make this funny. Absolutely. Let me welcome all of y'all to Capture the Reader with Laughter using humor in stories. Sarah is the author of both the fantasy noir, the noir fantasy Fairy Godmurder, and the comedic fantasy Double Crossing the Bridge. Would you like to introduce yourself, Sarah?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sarah J. Sover. I have 2 books out. Fairy Godmurder just released. I was shocked when people told me it was funny because I didn't think it was. It's unintentionally funny, apparently. And my first book, Double Crossing the Bridge, is a slapstick comedic fantasy about drunk trolls pulling a heist on the evil corporation. I've also got some short fiction out and some anthologies, and I do some writing for Writer's Digest whenever they let me. I don't know why they keep letting me, but they do.
Nice, thank you. And Shannon, absolutely so happy to have you here. Shannon is the author of the Dear Agony series, as well as an editor at iTooth Editing and a member of EFA. If you want to say hello, Shannon.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shannon Tierney. That is my pen name. I write zombie comedy and other infectious nonsense, including Dear Agony, which is relationship advice for soul-crushing monsters and the people who love them. You can find that work on Medium. You can find my socials at Kiss This Book, everywhere that I know of and actually want to be. I'm not on Pinterest, and I rarely get on social, so follow me and you'll hear nothing.
Awesome. No, thank you. Absolutely. Hello, Tim. Nice to see you.
Hello.
Tim Baughman Jr. is an author, blogger, and freelance editor. His books focus on the topics of mental health, sexuality, love, and relationships. Also, Ohio, fun fact, told through the lens of varying genres. He's the author of the 2021 novel Kotov Syndrome, the first book in the Azay's Realm dystopia series. Please let me know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And the 2016 short story compilation, An Epilogue to Innocence. Tim is also the host of Incorrect Music Theories, a comedy music podcast that attempts to analyze songs in the most absurd way possible. And just to let anyone watching this know, this has been the cursed panel. We have had all sorts of things go on beyond this, behind the scenes, and it is absolutely hilarious to all of us in that after the fact kind of way. Like it's we can laugh about it now. Absolutely.
No, too soon.
It's like tragedy plus time equals comedy, but there hasn't been enough time.
That's absolutely what we're talking about today. So yes, tragedy plus time. Heck yeah. Sarah, if I can start off with asking you, what are your humor inspirations?
Inspirations. Oh, well, I do have 2 children, so there's a lot there. I grew up on The Simpsons and then came of age to Futurama, so I'm going to have to give a big hat tip to Matt Groening for helping to make this what it is today. And Disenchantment's amazing. Have you seen Disenchantment?
My son loves it.
So good. Good. So I have everything influences, who you are. And I tend to joke through everything, like even labor. Like the nurses are like, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm like, I'm like a 20, but I'm still cracking jokes. Like I can't help it. They don't believe me. They're like, you must not be in that much pain. Oh, let's check. Oh, it's coming. So everything is funny. It has to be, right?
Oh no, absolutely. All my so it's real life, and I totally appreciate that. Absolutely. All my Shannon, is it a real life for you as well, or you picking up from books and from TV and from movie?
I mean, I don't want to say you have to have a bad childhood to be a comedy writer, but it really helps. But yeah, no, I mean, I got through life with books and recognizing just how preposterous the bullshit around me was. And so I think just that being part of my personality intrinsically has been a big part of why it's funny. Like, I thought I was writing horror until people told me that it was funny and they were laughing at it. And I was like, yeah, I did that on purpose. Okay. And I don't want to one up, but I have that similar kind of birth story where I made my husband miss my first child's crowning because I got a very good epidural and they're like, push, and I'm like, and they're like, push, and I'm like, and they're like, push, and I'm like, this just feels like a joke. Is anything happening? And he's like, yes. And apparently between me asking him that and him looking up, like, baby came out. So
Done.
But that's life. Life has to be funny because otherwise it would be hell, right?
I'm a little bit all over the place. I never saw myself as wanting to be a writer, particularly growing up. That didn't happen until much later, really into adulthood before I even considered that. So a lot of my humor inspiration comes from TV and movies to a certain extent. Big fan of Monty Python and their various works that they've done over time. Saw a good bit of Abbott and Costello as a kid, which really makes me sound like I'm like 70, but not the case.
Black and white TV, absolutely.
Right, yeah. We tuned up our Victrolas in most mornings just to make sure that we had music for the cows on the farm. Also, really like have gotten into things that are a little bit more quick-paced humor. I think a lot of people think of things like The Office or Parks and Recreation as that. Letterkenny probably falls into that category. And then you just have various comedians and comedians that have kind of influenced the way I write or way I think about humor over time. People like Richard Pryor or Robin Williams, or even some more recent folks. You have like Emmy Blotnick and other folks like that they've really driven the way I think of humor, more so than like comedic book writers or anything along those lines. And I think that probably both helps and hinders me writing humor.
Do you have anything you want to say about how stand-up can be a bridge to using humor in your writing?
So one of the comedians I neglected to mention, mostly because I wanted to talk about him later, was Norm Macdonald. And arguably my favorite joke I've ever heard is one that was told by Norm Macdonald. He's told it a handful of times on various things. It's this story, and if you're familiar with it, you'll immediately know what I'm talking about. It's called The Moth Story. And it's this 5-6 minute long meandering story for a pun finish. And it's the epitome of a shaggy dog story. And I think that discovering people, be it Norm Macdonald or others, that can do that well, really take long form and tie humor in throughout the course of a story that they're telling, or to repeatedly call back to it, much in the same as like you'll watch older episodes of Whose Line Is It Anyway, and they do a real good job of that. I think those type of things really helped me to understand how humor can work on a page in general. And that's obviously grown more into writing as I've worked other things, but I think that's where the genesis of it comes from.
In real life, and when you can see things, or even if we're talking about movies and TVs or TV shows, TVs, there's a certain kind of humor that can work when you have the physical body there. How does it differ from writing humor?
So I think what Sean is saying is basically like, if you have slapstick humor, someone falls because they trip on a banana, it's hard to write that and get the same sort of laugh that you would like, watching some poor sap like crack his head on the street. And for me, I kind of hate to say this, but there's a lot about humor writing that's very similar to literary writing because you're trying to evoke an emotion, which not necessarily like a full emotion, but you want to get people to laugh with you the same way people who are writing literary want to either feel that remorse or they want you to feel that emptiness or what have you. But it's very much so a study in manipulating people. Which is quite a bit different because you have to understand, an underlining, I don't want to say a misery, but you have to kind of understand that underlining like human condition in order to take something that is expected and then subvert it in a way that it's preposterous enough to get someone to giggle. And no, I don't think about it like that when I write fart scenes or anything like that. But
and there's an empathy in there, absolutely. Let me ask this: we're talking about physical humor, Abbott and Costello. If you're writing and you want to put that humor in there, but you think you maybe put too much, where do you see the line? So you don't come off too cartoonish, on the written page.
That is why having a good editor and multiple drafts is important. And I don't, I think that you can have a good gauge as a writer, and, reread it yourself, be like, oh, okay, well, I meant this book to be more serious and, kind of tone it down or go the other direction if you need to. And that is helpful. But one of the biggest things that I've learned over time is that, especially if you are working on a project for long enough, you get so involved in the project that it is difficult to see it from an outside perspective. This is why beta readers, this is why editors, this is why, other folks that you're looking in, critique partners, whatever it may be, those are invaluable resources because they don't have the same context of the book that you do. And it can help you see things from another way. I'm very fortunate. I have a very good relationship with my editor. I don't take 100% of her suggestions and make changes on them, but I say I do a pretty significant portion of them because I can recognize that, okay, A, she's attempting to make my work better, but also B, like, there's a reason that this piece of advice is being given. And I'm sure that, depending on context, some of it is creative. It's also that I have X story in my head. Like Daisy's Realm series as a whole has been stuck tumbling around my head since 2016, 2017. There's a lot more lore in my head than there is on the page right now because I've one book published and a second book in the process of being written out there. I know the head canons. They're still in my head.
But you avoid those
no one else does.
Info dumps. Yes. Sarah, do you have anything to say about the difference between, mediums as far as getting humor across?
I definitely like to use the concept of contrast. And it really depends on what you're doing. So my first book is more of your slapstick humor, but it runs a gamut. I've got everything from gross humor all the way up into political satire in that book. But I think the more absurd it is, the more I kind of have to have a seriousness to the voice and the way I'm presenting it in order to get that same effect that you would get by watching something on the television. And I actually think it almost heightens it. It makes it that much richer because like with Double Crossing the Bridge, my trolls, they have these mundane problems and they're just trying to make ends meet in this cesspool city and they're just trudging along, but they're, drunk trolls planning a heist. It's so, the concept is so absurd. And then when I pair it with these very serious situations and it almost comes off like a sitcom.
I think you have to, I agree. Like you have to have that sort of normalcy or standardness to kind of root onto, because if you're always at a 10, it's not funny anymore. Like, you can't just go in screaming and keep screaming the whole book.
It's where's the line? You don't want to go over that line to be cartoonish, but you want to have enough in there that you get your point across. I like that, Sarah, what you said about the contrast and how sometimes you have to lean further away from humor in the rest of your stuff in order to make it hit harder. all I can say is there's the two uh, authors of fantasy sci-fi who exemplify this, and that's Terry Pratchett as well as Douglas Adams. But is there a way for these to be kind of pulled to today? Will there ever be another that captures the imagination like that?
They're on my periphery in terms of writing. I've read one or two of Pratchett's books. I've not read anything by Douglas Adams. Because again, I didn't aspire to be an author. As a reader, I read what was interesting to me as a kid, and with no desire to become an author. It was just, did I need to read this for school, and did I like it? Those were my two quantifiers. And so if I had to read it for school, I was reading stuff, like Moby Dick that I wanted to throw off a bridge or something like that. But then you had stuff I liked, and like I wanted to be a sportscaster as a kid. So I was reading stuff by Stuart Scott and Mike Greenberg and Howard Cosell and, these folks who, obviously have a great media presence, but like they're not generally trying to be funny. They're not, and never mind trying to tell in sort of a fiction style. I know Mike Greenberg has later written some serious fiction, but beside the point, because that wasn't what I was reading him for at that point in time. And so like a lot of where I saw comedy in writing really growing up came in more things like either short stories that friends had written on whatever they had, a blog or whatever it may be, or in just like smaller things that could have been comics, that could have been just one sheeter things. Those were the types of things that I saw as funnier, but like the crossover between what I was interested in reading, even the fiction I was interested in was very bleak fiction, a lot of dystopia, a lot of darker stuff, and the comedy, there was very little crossover with that. And I recognize that speculative fiction, science fiction has had some great comedic writers, never mind the quality of their writing, which I think is in many cases undisputable. And what becomes a challenge there, in my personal opinion, is that it is hard enough to tell a story, is hard enough to be funny. To merge those two together is a unique skill. I tried to do that in my writing, but I would be remiss to say that I'm excellent at it, because I know that there are so many who have come before me who are better at it, and I'm coming at it from a world where it took me much longer to get into and caring about fiction writing than a lot of folks who have written. And also, that's not my background in terms of learning. So it's taken me more time to learn it than perhaps I otherwise would have expected.
I wish Sean Gibson were here.
Oh,
Oh my gosh. The part about the dragon was mostly true is it's kind of got that same kind of tone and that voice that just pulls you in. And also AJ Hartley's Burning Shakespeare. I'm currently in the middle of reading that right now, and I'm like, oh my God, this is like if Douglas Adams and met Screw Tape Letters. Like but it feels modern, even though they're going back in time to trying to save Shakespeare's plays that are being burned by a demon. But it's hilarious. But it's so dry. It's hilarious in that kind of dry. I mean, he's British, so there you go. But Sean also does that a lot with the part about the dragon was mostly true. You've got this tongue-in-cheek bard, and she's just she's hot. She knows she's hot, and she's the worst, most unreliable narrator. But she takes you through this journey, and they go and she's talking about how they went to go slay this dragon, and well, yeah, it happened like that. Well, it kind of didn't, except for this. Well, except for that, and it's hilarious, and you find just there were tears running down my face at one point reading that book.
Yeah. So, do you have any pointers, in the books that you have written, or from things that you have read, for integrating humor into a story when you don't have tone of voice? Thinking about it as a spoken medium. Take all that out. What do you have when it's just on the page that can bring humor to your story as you're writing it?
So it depends on how you want to go about doing it and the kind of book you're writing. Example of the book that did this really well by explicitly defying norm conventions of writing a book was I'm America and So Can You by Stephen Colbert. That said, the reason it worked is because it just tore up how you're supposed to use footnotes, how you're supposed to do academic drawings, all of that, and just laughed at it. And that's part of why it works so well. I think it becomes more challenging when you are looking to get into a traditional storytelling sense. As I mentioned, a lot of what I write is dystopia and sci-fi. And, I have more of a mental health lean on my writing, and some of the stuff I get into as kind of a result of that is a little bit heavier. And I think that as a reader, you need something to make it more palatable. Most people don't go just actively seeking out straight grimdark for sake of, I want to feel like the world is crashing down on me. If I wanted that, I could walk outside. But like a lot of stories do that through romantic subplots. They do that toward driving the plot itself, and like that becomes the focus. And while I do think that those are absolutely valid things, generally those are not the routes I have historically wanted to go. Not to say my stories don't use romantic subplots, they do, but I find that humor is easier to connect with people on than love, because romanticism, sexuality, there isn't necessarily anything that is defined, because there is a broad range and spectrum of sexuality, of romanticism over many people. And while certainly humor is also broad, and what one person finds funny, another might not, almost everyone I've ever met likes laughing. I've met one person, maybe two, ever, who said, no, comedy is stupid. And I pretty promptly stopped talking to that person. Because wow, not only are you being a buzzkill about something I like, but you just sound like not fun to be around. And I get that comedy is not your thing, but enjoying an experience and, just kind of crushing what other people like, that's a little harder for me to deal with. So, I think that you kind of have to have humor to a certain extent, especially when you deal with darker things, because otherwise you're just going to be writing a lot of sad, and people are going to come away from your stories, whatever, feel like, well, that was the thing.
First off, saying if you want, grim, dark, dystopian, just walk outside, you're reminding me of the rumor that floated around on Twitter for about 3 days that Elden Ring was actually based on Ohio. And this was bandied about.
Of course, Elden Ring's based on Ohio.
But as you said, don't really want to hang out with people who don't enjoy laughing. There is a dopamine to laughter. Like there literally is a physical reaction to it. So if you are doing your work, if you are writing something and you feel like you really should have some humor in there, you're doing something good for your reader. You're giving them a little bit of joy in their life. Shannon, are there any pitfalls you know of to avoid when adding humor?
So if you're asking me to put my editor hat on and ask, what do you do? Sometimes you do have to strike jokes that they may seem really, really funny to you standalone, but they just don't fit into the scene. So you have to read the room of your own writing. So if you're writing something that's really tragic and you've set up a joke and you realize you could put a joke in there, but the whole point is to take that beat and let there be tragedy, like you can't have the joke. The joke destroys the tone at that point. So just, make sure, put all the humor you can in, but it's one of those kill your darlings things where sometimes not all the humor, not all the jokes, not all the pans or the gags need to be there necessarily, especially if you destroy like your actual themes or, you know, what you're trying to convey in total to the audience. So that's one of those things that it's a hard one, piece of knowledge, you know, what is too far, what maintains without that destruction. Because sometimes you can have really sad humor that really fits a tragic scene, and sometimes you can have really bad humor like that banana fall, and it needs to go. But I would suggest anybody who hasn't read Christopher Moore, yes, he is not a dead old British white man, but he's an alive American man. He's pretty funny. But I don't know if anybody's going to hit those sort of, you know, crisp British humor of the 70s and 80s and 90s. I do miss, you know, these old men. But I think there are people who are funnier that reach out to larger demographics. And one of the things that I feel like both of those authors did a lot, it's almost like what David Bowie did, even though he wasn't, you know, a humorist. But you feel like they're talking directly to you in their books. That you're in on this joke with them that many other people don't get. The absurdity of normal life, the absurdity of, you know, the bureaucracy or the you know, the bullshit that society says you have to do, like go to the bottom of a basement to find the plans of blah blah blah. Like this is standard and everybody's okay with it except you and this guy who's writing you this story. It's all for you. So the fact that there's more of a broad, I don't want to say broad readership, but because there are so many more books that are being written by different kinds of people who are able to access audiences, I don't know that you will see like just two people representing all of humor anymore, or all of anything anymore, which is actually a great thing. You know, I'd rather have a lot of fantastic artists that would not have gotten a chance have a smaller readership in these two guys than have just two people who don't represent all of humanity, like hogging the spotlight, much as I love them.
No, in the filter of time, you know, I'm talking about two authors from a bit ago, and we can sit here and go, oh, they were great. But really, at the time, a very different situation and a milieu that they were involved in.
You always have to watch out for pitfalls. You never know when a pile of leaves is just going to give way and you fall into a trap.
It was right there.
Like, I don't know what you expected with that question.
But I love that point that you brought up, Shannon, and this goes to the contrast, I think, Sarah, that you're talking about, which is bathos. And that's when you have a very heavy scene and you undercut it. The Marvel movies are famous for doing this, for, you know, you're going to have a world-saving event and then the one character turns to the other. Oh, you have a booger, you know, right here. If you don't mind, you know. Sarah, do you use that at all? This contrasting, you know, breaking the super heavy things in your work?
Oh, absolutely. Fairy Godmurder, like I didn't even, like I said, I didn't realize it was funny. It's noir detective fantasy, you know. I'm like, and then my publisher was like, oh yeah, read this humorous fantasy. I was like, really? And he's my editor too, so it's not like he just, you know, published it and didn't read it. He knew what he was talking about and started looking back at it. I'm like, oh, there's a, again, I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say here, but there's an inappropriate joke on the first page. I guess there is. It's just kind of leveled in there, but it does. I have a very my character is, you know, hell-bent on vengeance, and she is tunnel vision, and she is serious and intense all the time. So I have to undercut her constantly. So, and her best friend is, I call her a consummate bruise poker, because she'll find these cracks in Gwen, and she'll just be like, yeah, all right, yeah. Anyway, and so yeah, I do. I have to cut Gwen's intensity because I don't think anybody really wants to read all about that all-encompassing, you know, vengeance all the time.
I love doing that. But to your point, like, you know, the Aziz Rum series in general is dystopian. It's got elements of sci-fi and fantasy and, you know, a bunch of other genres in it, because again, I didn't set out to be a writer. I struggle to stick in a genre as a result. But, you know, when you deal with things that are heavy and that are big, wide scoping things, and I think the Avengers did this really well, even though I'm not super Marvel person, is like, you know, you have this you have Thanos trying to destroy half of the entire universe. I need shawarma. Those types of things. Like, I think that's a good thing to have in being in small bursts or whatever. Not just because it gives your audience a small break from whatever the stakes are. I do think that is a reason. What I think that does, that goes unsaid in a lot of cases, is that it makes your characters more believable if you write it well. So, without getting too spoilery, the two lead characters in the Aces Realm series are this woman, Erica, and her android ex-girlfriend, later girlfriend, Abby. And like, they have those moments like that where they kind of, banter a little bit back and forth. And I think it would be remiss of me not to tie things like that in, because like, they've known each other for 10 plus years. They're dating. Like, even if the world is going to shit around you, you're there with someone you like and you're close to, regardless if it's a romantic relationship or not. You're probably going to quip something funny here and there just because you like them and like being around them. And I think that having those little things like that, it makes people invest in your characters more. Even if that's not the primary purpose of the humor, it's doing a second job, and that matters.
Totally understand. Absolutely. Let me ask this. Can you be topical in your humor in a written medium?
Absolutely. It depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, you write comedy for a lot of different reasons. Double Crossing the Bridge has a lot of political satire layered into it. And I feel like if it becomes outdated, that's fantastic. That means that some of these concepts are no longer resonating with people. And so maybe I helped in a small part, highlight these horrible things. Granted, the things that I have layered in there are not likely to go away anytime soon. But but yeah, you can be topical. I mean, I do pop culture references and stuff too. I'm not trying to change the world here. I say in one breath, I'm like, I write satire, I want to change the world. And then I mean, but there's fart jokes, like so I'm really just trying to get the stories out there. So it depends really on what you're trying to do, I think.
Topical, I think, is different than trying to catch on to trends. For example, you look at shows like The Daily Show, they are very much intentionally doing work for stuff related to current event, recent news. And they treat it like a newscast. Very much that's the intent of it. It is comedic, but it is newscast based. So you can be current. The rewatch, reread, whatever value varies on something like that. And it becomes to where certain bits, like in the case of The Daily Show, are rewatchable, whereas others just like, this is a microcosm of what the world was like at that given time. Stories can be like that as well. That's why I think it's harder to go to the well on that with being topical. So I think it very much lies in the reference, yes, rely on no category.
Oh, I think there's fart jokes in Gulliver's Travels, and saying that about topical makes me think of Jonathan Swift and a Modest Proposal, which was absolutely the straight-laced, story, of course, about a terrible, terrible thing. Let's eat some babies, because really they'll never grow up to anything anyway. And let's say this, Shannon, in writing your kind of humor, are you ever worried about being taken the wrong way?
Yeah, there's a couple of ones of the Dear Agony where people wanted me to go the opposite direction on something. I think the original one, so this one isn't up, but I have a character escape, the axe-wielding maniac, because she was the virgin, and her mom says she needs to send him a gift basket as a thank you for not killing her, and everyone's like, no, you should have her have to do it, and you have to. But I was like, oh, I don't think you get that this is the abuser and she's the abused, and you're actually siding with the abuser being thanked for not being more abusive. And so I'm like, oh, I can't publish this one because I'm not cool with that. if it's not funny, you know, with my take where no, don't give this guy, you know, a wet penny, like, then I don't want to put this one in because that is topical. And I was missing the mark with that particular one. But there's, you know, there's other stuff like the husband that's a lazy, like, layabout who's a literal maggot and in one of them. I mean, there are good for nothing spouses that are like this, where, you know, you marry them. Well, I shouldn't say you. I don't know about you. Where people, you know, they marry somebody because they think they're a certain way and they're not, and they turn to kind of a shitbag, and, you know, what are you gonna do now? That's still topical. You know, relationship issues are evergreen. Unfortunately, they're evergreen. So when I write my relationship advice, I want it to have good advice for people who are in real life situations that actually mirror these circumstances with shithead spouses. With bleephead spouses. You know, taken to the extreme that, you know, whatever their, I don't want to say defect, but their defect is so pervasive that they are true monsters. And so that in a lot of ways is very topical. You know, there's some comedy that's not really topical, and it's just funny for the sake of being funny, for being an escape. But I think a lot of the really good comedy is a reflection on society, or reflection on the social mores of the day. And sometimes they continue to be relevant 30, 40 years later. And that's, in some ways, unfortunate, in some ways good. But I agree with Sarah. It's like, I would love it if this is so preposterous to a future generation because these problems are no longer, you know, existent. That's not where we're at.
No, and I love that you just undercut the question I was about to ask, which is, what do you have to do to make sure your writing doesn't feel dated in the future?
It's really hard to put anything pop culture in a work because of that. And this is problematic because my favorite trope, for lack of a better term, I love doing shout outs to other media. Like, it is just a thing I love doing. But those don't always stick. So either I think you need to make your references, you know, not as immediate, or you need to be very sparing with how you use them. So I think that it's limited, but it does have its effect.
Well, let's reframe that. So, you know, if you're being topical, if you're writing something and it is about a situation in contemporary life, you know, you're Star Trek, but you're still talking about, you know, the 1960s. Well, the only way that it doesn't feel topical anymore is if the world changes around it. It's not a humor example, but Kirk kissing Uhuru, like, was a thing back in the day and is not a thing anymore. So people can just watch it and it goes away. It's just part of the regular episode. That's neither here nor there. I'm sorry to jump sideways, but Sarah, what would you say? Do you like to use comic relief characters in your story, or do you want, like, everybody to have a little fun?
I don't like when a character has only one purpose, whether it's comic relief or something else. I want my characters to be three-dimensional. So, I mean, that works. Again, that kind of goes back to what you were talking about with the different media. On the screen, that works great. In books, I don't know. I can't think of any character that is just, I mean, I know there are comic relief characters, but they're also other things, and they play other roles in the stories. I don't have any Jar Jars. I mean, I just don't. I love it. I'm a fan of those characters on the screen. I really am. But I'll go down fighting about gremlins too. I love those kind of characters. But no, I don't. But at the same time, you can't use the same type of humor for each character. Like, every character has their own way of interacting with the world and looking at the world. So there may be opportunities for humor, but it's different types of humor. It's not like I've got one that has that caustic, you know, sarcasm going, and then, but if everybody did that, that wouldn't be a great read. Like, so, and I've got one that's just a heart of gold, just trying to make things happen. But he's trying to make his career. He's a Griffin detective, and he's so insecure about his place in the precinct that he speaks only in hard-boiled slang whenever he's uncomfortable. And it's kind of, it's funny, but it's sad, but it's like, it's just a part of who he is. So I think the humor has to be tied to the character traits.
Absolutely. And if you were reading like a novelization of The Last Airbender, you'd have to kind of take the cabbages guy out, because otherwise he just screams, like random, there's no context for it being a pratfall, in this different type of medium. And Shannon, for sure, every character to yours, is kind of serious, except the person writing the letter, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, Agony herself is always very serious with her responses, regardless of if they're like completely, bonkers or not. Like that's just, how it is. I mean, whatever ridiculous circumstance the letter writer comes up with, she's going to do her due diligence to try to help them, work this out. Whether, it's a vampire that's annoyed that he's got to sleep on his in-laws' couch instead of going to his, bloody bacchanal or whatever. So a lot of times they're both straight men, and it's the content itself that is, the banana man. Like there's not really a true banana man inside of the Dear Agony stuff. But when I'm writing fiction, I'm in agreement. There's only so far that can take. That's great for my short medium stuff, but it's really hard to just have those sort of one note things long term. Like I don't know if you remember, was it oh man, there was this like dog puppet back in the 90s. Triumph. And like Triumph, when he was just like a bit part in a larger show, worked. But once Triumph got famous and he was like on the red carpet, it just is like it stalled. It was so bad. So you also have to pay attention to like, the length of what you're writing and what will actually fit, because some stuff that is great in small doses, like if you get an hour of that and you're stuck with it, it doesn't work. But yeah, I mean, you can't just have one kind of joke or one kind of humor or one kind of thing that's going to hold the book together. There's got to be that sort of human element to it, or it's not funny. Like you can't just have a Kool-Aid man, busting through the wall the same way in a book that you could in like, I don't know, anything else. In a visual medium.
It was like a Triumph, the insult comic dog,
Yes.
And he would be on for 15 seconds, 20 seconds. He would just like talk smack, and everybody liked him. And I think you're right. And I would have to look on YouTube to find out or not. I think they gave him a show.
Yeah.
Like gave him a half an hour of prime time, and it was been, just trepanned from American memory that this even happened.
Yeah, no, it ruined it. It ruined it because it went on like they should never have given this poor guy who's had a hand up a puppet's ass booty the ability to improv for 45 minutes or whatever. It didn't work. Yeah, so I forgot the question at this point, but
we got somewhere. That's fine. It doesn't matter where we started. It's across the ocean. We'll get somewhere else for sure. So we're here. We're talking about three-dimensional characters. I layer your humor in, and kind of let it speak for itself by undercutting tense situations and how you create that contrast in there. Is there anything else, Sarah, that you would say to an author who is working to put humor into their work in progress?
I mean, don't. If you're working for it too much, it's going to come off as awkward and uncomfortable. And I mean, it should. I hate to say that. It should.
No, that is the best. I love it, because as you said, Fairy Godmurder, you wrote it, and then someone told you it was funny.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo Sarah. If you're trying too hard to simply write humor, then your plot is probably going to suffer. And honestly, one of the things that's going to get people to continue to read your jokes is that you have compelling characters and compelling situations. And so if the jokes are trying to write jokes are getting in the way of you getting your draft down, then just write the plot, write the characters, add the humor, second, third, fourth draft down the line, because it's possible you write like 3 whole chapters that disappear, and all that time you spent writing jokes and agonizing over them and tripping yourself could have gone to something else. And, you know, if it's too much work at the beginning, then you might just drop the book, like go outside and have a real life. And who wants that?
It's true. I'm a big fan of layering things in with drafts. That's how my brain works. I'm like, let's get to the end, and then we can layer in the things that I want to be there. And so,
if you're reading Shakespeare and you're reading a version that doesn't have dick jokes, you are doing yourself a disservice, because this dude wrote to highbrow and lowbrow for a reason. So like, things lose context over time just due to cultural and linguistic drift. This is why it was so hard, say, for example, to take the works of Sappho of Lesbos and be able to translate it, because the dialect that she wrote in of Greek kind of died out over time. And by the time there was an interest in her works, a lot of her work had been lost. So like, you're going to have cultural and linguistic drift over time. You're going to have, you know, all those types of things. I don't think that in and of itself is a reason to forego writing humor. You know, write the story that you want to enjoy first and foremost. If you are looking to take it, if you're looking to submit it to an agent via query, if you're looking to self-publish it, certainly get feedback from others, and certainly look to, you know, edit it, improve upon it, whatever it may be. However, if you don't enjoy the story you're writing, it's going to be a lot harder for you to give a shit about it and finish it.
Well, thank you guys so much for talking about humor, and we'll totally you know, let's say this. Let me ask, we're here in 2022. So, you know, we've been through things. Maybe it's too early, maybe it's too late. What is going to be the next big funny thing, or thing that we can make fun of as a society?
What?
You know,
knew that we would be rich.
Maybe there's no answer. I have no idea.
I don't think there's any way to predict that until it happens. I mean, if we could, then we would be on the forefront of it, I'm sure. But it's, yeah.
I mean, it's really, it's always something that you do that's topical. So making fun of old people is also evergreen. You know, boomers are gonna die, and then we'll make fun of Gen X, and then they'll die, and then we'll make fun of millennials, and they'll die, and I can't remember who comes after us, but they'll make fun of them too. So I mean, aging, the slow, arduous passage of time and eventual death, I think that's the next big thing.
I actually think, and I think that people are going to start embracing and it was actually Douglas Adams where it first occurred to me that there doesn't have to be a victim to every joke. That there's different types of humor, and that I'm loving the younger generations, because they're like, no, that's wrong. And I'm freaking loving that. I'm like, yeah, you know what? It is. I mean, so you're right, Gen Z. I appreciate it. But
I agree. Like,
I think,
you don't have to make fun of people, but the punching down, I think, has decreased. Like the Dennis
really
Leary
has.
kind of jokes are not, you know, they're not in vogue at this point the way they were back in the 90s.
And the shock humor, like when I was younger, when I was first starting to like put my toes into comedy, I was really into some of those shock jokes, and they do not fly anymore, and they shouldn't really. I think we've all been through so much that it's like, okay, yeah, aren't you edgy? You know, like it's just not funny anymore, like dead baby jokes and things like that. It's just like there's better ways to release that dopamine, you know. and it was Douglas Adams where I was watching that whale fall, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I had a comedic epiphany, and it's kind of stuck with me that there's lots of ways to laugh.
Well, that's awesome, and I appreciate it so much, you guys. Thank you so much for coming on to WriteHive, writing with humor, and let's hope that I hit record, you know, just to start it all, because otherwise, then I don't know what we're gonna do. I have to start all over again.
I'm gonna need another beer.
Oh, absolutely. Awesome.
Hey, Sarah, where can we find you?
Oh, sarahjsover.com, on Twitter, on Facebook.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you.
Where can we find you?
I don't know. At my house. I am Kiss This Book on Instagram and Twitter and what's the old one? Facebook. And I'll probably try to write something. I do have a website. I think it's readshannontierney.com. And you can always find me on Medium under Read Shannon Tierney, and you can see Dear Agony's advice there. Go if you need advice or if you're married to or in love with a monster.
That sounds amazing, and I'm going to totally look it up.
Super appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about humor in writing and give us great examples. Definitely there'll be links below to some of Tim's work out there. And watch out for those giants down the path over there in Elden Ring, Ohio.